and saw the truth I had been blind to all along.
For years, I believed I was the one who loved more. I was wrong. And it took dying to show me the truth.
My name is Elena Rios. I am 44 years old. For years, I believed I understood my husband. I believed I knew what our marriage needed. I believed I knew what love looked like, what it cost, what it required. And then I died and saw the truth I had been blind to all along. This is what happened in that sacred space between life and death. This is the story I never wanted to tell, because telling it means admitting who I really was. I was not the villain in my own story. That is what made it so dangerous. I was the good wife, the devoted one, the one who stayed up past midnight folding laundry while Andres slept. The one who remembered every appointment, every birthday, every preference of every person in our home. I built our life with my bare hands, and I was proud of that. Deeply, privately, relentlessly proud. 22 years of marriage. 3 children. A home that never fell apart because I never allowed it to. I was the axis everything turned on. And I made sure, in the quiet ways only a wife can, that everyone knew it. Andres was a good man. I will say that clearly because it matters. He was patient in ways I never recognized as strength. He was gentle with our children in ways I was too busy to notice. He worked hard. He came home. He tried, in his way. But his way was never quite enough. Not for me. Not for the standard I had set without ever showing him the measuring stick. He forgot to say thank you one Tuesday evening after I had spent 3 hours making his mother's recipe from scratch because he had mentioned once, weeks ago, that he missed it. He sat down, ate, checked his phone, and said nothing. And something inside me filed it. Quietly. Without drama. Without a word. I simply added it to the list I had been keeping since the early years of our marriage. The list no one knew existed. Not even Andres. Especially not Andres. That list was never written on paper. It lived in my chest, organized by category, cross-referenced by date. Every sacrifice unmissed. Every effort unacknowledged. Every morning I woke before him, every school run I handled alone, every dinner party I executed perfectly while he stood in the corner talking about football. I kept it all. Every single entry. And I told myself this was simply memory. This was simply awareness. This was what responsible wives did. They remembered so they could keep things running. I never once considered that what I called awareness. Andres experienced as a weight he could not name. I never once stopped to ask why, in 22 years, he had slowly stopped reaching for me in the night. Why his laughter, once so easy, had become something he seemed to ration carefully around me. Why our children, when they needed comfort, walked past me in the hallway and knocked on their father's door. I told myself it was because I had raised them to be independent. I told myself Andres was simply introverted. I told myself the distance was natural, inevitable, the ordinary settling of a long marriage. I told myself many things in those years. I was very good at it. Telling myself things. Building explanations that kept me at the center of every story as the one who gave the most, tried the hardest, deserved better. What I could not see, what I was completely, catastrophically blind to, was the expression on my own face when I gave. Not joy. Not love. Something quieter and colder than either of those things. Something that watched. Measured. Waited. I was not a cruel woman. I want you to understand that. I never screamed. I never insulted him. I never threatened to leave. My weapons were softer than that, and far more precise. A sigh held just long enough to be noticed. A silence that answered his question without words. A warmth I withdrew so gradually he could never point to the moment it left, only notice, one day, that the room felt colder than it used to. I operated in the register just below accusation. just below the threshold where a man can say, clearly, you are hurting me. And, because he could never say it clearly, he simply went quiet. And I interpreted his quiet as proof that I was the one suffering most. 22 years. And I had never once, not once, sat across from my husband and asked him what he needed. Not what he wanted for dinner. Not what time he would be home. I mean the real question. The one that costs something to ask because the answer might require you to change. I had never asked Andres, are you happy? Are you seen? Does this marriage feel like home to you, or does it feel like somewhere you survive? I did not ask because, somewhere beneath all my certainty, I was afraid of the answer. And so I kept giving, and kept counting, and kept waiting to be recognized in the way I believed I deserved. And the years passed the way years do when you are too busy being right to notice they are leaving. The morning it happened was unremarkable in the way that final mornings often are. It was a Tuesday in autumn. The kind of morning Bogota does quietly, gray light through the kitchen window, the smell of rain on concrete, the city waking up beneath a sky that had not decided yet what kind of day it wanted to be. I was at the stove making coffee. The good kind, the kind Andres liked, ground fresh, because I had read once that it made a difference, and I had never stopped doing it even though he had never once commented on it. Another entry. Filed quietly. Stored without ceremony. He had already left for work. No goodbye. He did it sometimes, moved through the morning like a man navigating a house in the dark, careful not to disturb anything, and then simply gone. Door closed. Car started. The particular silence of a home that held his absence. I stood at the stove and I felt it land in my chest the way it always did. Small. Sharp. Like a stone dropped into still water, and then the rings spreading outward through everything. He could not even say goodbye. After everything. After 22 years of everything I had given this man, he could not turn his face toward me on his way out the door. I poured the coffee. I stood at the counter. I thought, not for the first time, that I was tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes. The other kind. The tired that settles into the bones of a woman who has been holding everything together for so long she has forgotten what it felt like to be held herself. The pressure began in my chest without introduction. I remember thinking it was tension. The familiar tightening I sometimes felt in the mornings when the weight of the day arranged itself in my mind before I was ready for it. I set the cup down. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum the way you do when something feels wrong but you are not yet ready to call it wrong. I breathed. Once. Twice. Then my left arm went strange. Not painful exactly. Heavy. Disconnected. Like it belonged to someone else and I was only borrowing it. I turned toward the kitchen table and the floor tilted. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in films, not a collapse with arms thrown wide. It was slower than that and more humiliating. My knees simply stopped agreeing to hold me. I went down against the cabinet, my shoulder catching the edge of the counter, the coffee cup shattering somewhere behind me on the tiles, and then I was on the floor looking up at the kitchen ceiling and thinking, with perfect absurd clarity, I just mopped that floor yesterday. I could not move my arm. The pressure in my chest had become something enormous, something architectural, like a building settling onto my ribcage from the inside. I tried to call out. What came out was not a word. It was barely a sound. The ceiling was very still above me. The gray autumn light came through the window at an angle that struck me, even then, as beautiful. I remember that. I remember thinking the light was beautiful while my heart was stopping. The mind does strange things in the seconds before it goes dark. It reaches for the ordinary. It reaches for something to hold on to that isn't terror. I thought of Andres. Not with love, not in that moment. I am being honest with you because this story requires honesty. I thought of him with a flash of something that shames me now. I thought, He did not even say goodbye this morning. And now look. Now look what has happened. Even in the moment of my dying, I was keeping score. The light narrowed. The sound of the city outside the window became very far away, and then further still, like a radio losing its signal station by station until there is nothing left but static, and then even the static goes. My chest stopped hurting. That was the strangest part. The pain that had been crushing me simply released. And I felt light in a way I had not felt in 22 years. Weightless. Unchained from something I had not known was holding me down. And then the kitchen ceiling was gone. And I was somewhere else entirely. There was no darkness. That is the first thing I need you to understand, because when people imagine death, they imagine darkness. They imagine falling. They imagine cold and silence and the terrifying absence of everything. But there was none of that. The kitchen ceiling dissolved, and what replaced it was not nothing. It was warmth. A warmth so complete, so total, that it did not feel like temperature at all. It felt like being recognized. Like walking into a room where everyone already knows your name and is genuinely glad you came. I was standing. I did not feel myself stand. One moment I was supine on my kitchen floor with autumn light fading above me, and then I was upright, steady, weightless in the way that means something different from what that word means on Earth. On Earth, weightless means unsupported. Here, weightless meant held. Completely. Without condition. As though the very air had decided to be responsible for me. I looked at my hands first. I do not know why. Perhaps because hands are the first evidence of ourselves we reach for when something has shifted. We look at our hands to confirm we are still real, still present, still the same person we were a moment ago. My hands looked like my hands. But the skin had a quality I cannot adequately name. A luminosity that was not light from outside, but something generated from within, as though every cell remembered what it was made for and was quietly celebrating the fact. I was in a hallway. It announced itself gradually, the way your eyes adjust to a new light, not all at once, but in layers, detail arriving behind detail. The walls were warm amber, the color of late afternoon through old glass, and they stretched further in both directions than my eyes could honestly follow. The floor beneath me was smooth and pale, neither cold nor warm, simply present. And the walls were covered in photographs. No, not covered. Lined. Carefully, deliberately, lovingly lined, as though someone had spent a great deal of time deciding exactly where each one belonged. Photographs I recognized. Every one of them. My wedding day. The hospital the morning after our first child. A Tuesday evening in our first apartment when Andres had cooked dinner badly, and we had laughed until we could not breathe. A Christmas morning. A beach I had almost forgotten. 22 years of living arranged along a corridor that felt simultaneously infinite and intimate, like the inside of a memory that had been waiting patiently for me to pay attention to it. I walked toward the nearest photograph. It was our wedding day. Andres and I on the steps of the church in Bogota, his hand at my waist, my bouquet slightly tilted because I had been laughing at something. I could not remember now what it was. In the photograph, as I had always remembered it, I looked radiant. Happy. The bride who had arrived at exactly the life she wanted. But as I stood before it now, the photograph moved. Not dramatically. A breath of motion, like film instead of print, like the moment itself was still happening inside the frame. And I watched my own face on those church steps, and I saw something I had never seen in 22 years of remembering that day. Behind the laugh, behind the radiance, behind the bouquet tilted at its charming angle. I saw the calculation. Even then. Even on that first day. The way my eyes moved to see who was watching. The way my smile adjusted itself for the audience on the steps below us. The way I held Andres's hand. Not the way you hold the hand of the person you love, loose and warm and trusting, but the way you hold something you have worked hard to acquire and intend to keep. I stepped back from the photograph. I did not want to be seeing what I was seeing. That is the truth of it. There is a particular nausea that comes not from illness, but from recognition. From seeing yourself clearly for the first time and understanding that the clarity has always been available, that you simply chose, repeatedly, deliberately, to look somewhere else instead. I felt that nausea move through me like a tide. I pressed my hand to my chest the same way I had in the kitchen before I fell. But this time there was no pain. Only the sensation of something being required of me. Something I had spent 22 years refusing to give. I kept walking. The photographs continued on both sides, chronological in a way that felt less like order and more like argument, as though the hallway itself was building toward something, leading me somewhere I had not agreed to go but could not turn away from. I saw the years of our children's childhoods. I saw dinner tables and school performances and ordinary evenings in our living room. And in every image, Andres was present. He was always present. That struck me with a force I was not prepared for. In every memory I had carried of those years, he had existed mostly as an absence, the man who wasn't quite enough, who didn't quite show up, who failed to meet the standard I had never shown him. But here, in this hallway that did not lie, he was in every frame. Seated beside me. Standing behind me. Kneeling on the floor building puzzles with our youngest while I stood at the kitchen doorway with my arms crossed and my face wearing an expression I can only describe now as inventory. I was taking stock of what he was and was not doing. I was already composing the entry for the list. He was on the floor with our daughter, laughing, fully present in the way only people who are not keeping records can be fully present. And I was in the doorway, counting. The hallway shifted. Not physically, the walls did not move, the amber light did not change. But the atmosphere thickened, the way air thickens before rain, pressure building towards something inevitable. The photographs ahead began to glow differently, warmer, brighter, as though they contained more heat than the ones behind me. I moved toward them without deciding to move. My feet simply understood that this was the direction truth lived in. Then I saw the rings. They floated at eye level in the center of the hallway, suspended in air that held them the way water holds something without quite touching it. 2 wedding rings. Side by side. Ours. I knew them the moment I saw them, the same way you know a voice before the person speaks. My ring burned with a hard, brilliant light. Constant. Relentless. The light of something that has never questioned its own brightness. Andres's ring flickered. A candle in a room where the window is open just enough. Still lit. Still burning. But at the mercy of something it could not control and could not name. I stood before those rings for what felt like a very long time. And I understood, without anyone explaining it to me, what I was looking at. My certainty. His uncertainty. My relentless, blazing, self-generated conviction that I was the one who loved more, gave more, deserved more, set beside the quiet, flickering, wind-threatened faith of a man who had been trying to love me in a draft of my own making for 22 years. He had not stopped loving me. That was not what the flickering meant. He had simply run low. The way a candle runs low not because the wax is exhausted, but because the oxygen in the room has been slowly, incrementally consumed by something else burning far too bright and far too proud to consider what it might be taking from the air around it. I had been taking his air. I reached toward his ring instinctively, the way you reach toward a flame to shelter it from wind. And the moment my fingers approached it, the hallway opened. Not open like a door. Open like understanding opens, sudden, irreversible, the specific violence of clarity arriving in a mind that has been carefully closed for a very long time. The wall to my left became transparent. Not glass, something softer than glass, something that felt like the membrane between what we know and what we have refused to know. And through it, I saw our living room. Our actual living room in Bogota. The sofa, the lamp with the slightly bent shade I had always meant to replace, the bookshelf Andres had built himself one weekend while I told him twice that the shelves were uneven. I was looking at a memory, but I was not inside it. I was beside it, observing it the way you observe something from outside a window, and the perspective changed everything. Andres was sitting on the sofa. This was perhaps 4 years ago. I placed it by the age of our youngest school photograph on the wall behind him. It was late, past 10. He was still in his work clothes, jacket off, tie loosened, and he was not watching television or reading or scrolling his phone. He was sitting completely still with his hands loosely clasped between his knees, staring at nothing, in the posture of a man who is not resting but enduring. I watched him for a long moment through that transparent wall, and then I watched myself enter the room. I came from the hallway carrying folded laundry. I remembered this evening now, recognized it as it played, the memory surfacing from wherever I had filed it under Ordinary Tuesday. I set the laundry on the chair. I looked at Andres sitting still on the sofa, and what I said, I heard myself say it clearly through the membrane, was, "You could have started the dishwasher." Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "You look tired. What is happening inside you tonight?" Not, "I am here, I see you. Tell me what you are carrying." You could have started the dishwasher. Andres looked up at me, and through that transparent wall, standing in a hallway between life and death, I saw his face in a way I had never permitted myself to see it in the actual moment. He was not annoyed. He was not defensive. He was not the emotionally unavailable husband I had written him as in the story I told about our marriage. He was diminished. In a way so gradual, so incremental, that neither of us had named it while it was happening. He looked like a man who had arrived at the edge of something and was deciding very quietly whether or not to step back from it. He said, "I forgot. I am sorry." And the version of me in that living room made a sound. Not a word, a sound. The particular exhalation that communicates more disappointment than a sentence could, the kind of sound that says, "Of course you forgot. You always forget. I carry everything here while you simply exist inside the life I maintain for you." I picked up the laundry and walked back out of the room without another word. And I watched Andres, alone on the sofa, close his eyes. Not in sleep. In something closer to grief. The membrane wall shifted, and I was looking at another evening. Different year, same sofa, same lamp. Andres had made dinner. He did this sometimes, arrived home before me on the evenings my work ran long, and had something on the stove by the time I walked through the door. On this particular evening, he had made sancocho, my mother's recipe, the one I had described to him once in passing years before. He had written it down. I had not known he wrote it down. He had made it from memory, imperfectly, the broth slightly thinner than it should have been, the plantains cut a different way, but he had made it. And he had set the table properly, the good plates, the ones reserved for occasions, because for reasons he had apparently decided on his own, this was an occasion. I watched myself walk through the door and stop in the kitchen doorway. I watched my face as I took in the table, the plates, the pot on the stove. And I saw what I had never allowed myself to see in the actual moment, that my first expression, before I rearranged it into something warmer, was assessment. The broth was thin. The plantains were wrong. And even as I said, "You cooked," with the smile I produced for moments like this, something behind my eyes had already opened the ledger and noted, imperfect. Filed. Credit. Partial. Andres watched my face the way people watch the sky when they are not certain what weather is coming. And he saw it, the assessment, the adjustment, the smile arriving a half-second too late to be entirely real. I know he saw it because his shoulders, which had been lifted with something that must have been hope, descended slowly back to their habitual position. He said, "I tried to remember how your mother made it." And I said, "It is very good. The plantains are cut differently." "It is very good. The plantains are cut differently." 22 years. And that was the register I operated in. That was the love I offered the man who had written down my mother's recipe and set the good plates on an ordinary Wednesday because he wanted, in his quiet and imperfect way, to tell me that I mattered to him. I gave him a compliment with a correction sewn into its lining. I gave him warmth with an invoice attached. And I called it honesty. I called it high standards. I called it simply being direct. I had never once called it what it was. The membrane walls went dark. The hallway contracted gently around me, not threatening, not punishing, simply present, the way a hand on your shoulder is present when someone needs you to stop moving and actually feel what you are feeling. I stood between those two wedding rings, mine still blazing, his still flickering, and I felt something break open in my chest that had nothing to do with my stopped heart. I had loved Andres the way I needed to be loved. Loudly. Visibly. With a running record of evidence. And I had given him not one moment in 22 years of loving him the way he needed to receive it. Quietly. Freely. Without the weight of what it cost me attached to every gesture like a price tag he was expected to read and honor. I had never asked him how he needed to be loved. Not once. Not ever. In 22 years of marriage, I had never sat across from my husband and asked the single question that might have saved us decades of quiet damage. How do I love you well? The rings pulsed once in the amber air before me. And then a presence arrived in the hallway, not walking, not descending, simply there, the way warmth is simply there when you step into sunlight. Gentle beyond my capacity to describe it. And yet I felt, unmistakably, that I was fully seen. Not judged. Not condemned. Seen. Every entry in every ledger I had ever kept, every adjusted smile, every sigh deployed like a small, precise weapon. All of it visible, all of it known, and somehow, impossibly, all of it held with something that felt like grief and grace existing in the same breath. A voice. Not audible the way sound is audible. Present the way truth is present, inside you before you hear it, recognized before it forms. You gave much, but you gave it to be owed. That is not love. That is a transaction. I could not speak. I could not defend myself. I could not reach for the ledger. There was no ledger here. There was only the truth of 22 years laid out in amber light, and a man's flickering ring beside my relentless burning one, and the understanding, arriving now with the full weight of everything I had refused to carry until this moment. That I had built a marriage that looked like devotion from the outside and felt like debt from the inside. Andres is still waiting to be loved freely. You still have time. I wept. There in that hallway between living and dying, I wept the way you weep when you have finally stopped arguing with the truth. Not performed weeping. Not the kind I had sometimes deployed in our arguments to shift the gravity of a room. Real weeping. The kind that comes from the place beneath strategy, beneath self-protection, beneath 22 years of being certain you were the one who loved more. The kind that empties you so completely that what fills the space afterward is not more of yourself, but something better. Something you could not have made room for while you were so busy being right. Go back. And give without keeping count. The voice did not fade. It simply completed. The way a sentence completes, not cut off, not interrupted, but finished, every word having arrived exactly where it was meant to land. And the landing place was somewhere beneath my ribs, beneath every defense I had ever constructed, in the soft, unguarded territory I had spent 22 years making sure no one could reach. Not even Andres. Especially not Andres. Go back. And give without keeping count. I stood in that amber hallway and I understood, with a clarity that had no mercy in it and no cruelty either, that I had a choice. Not the dramatic choice of films. Not a booming voice demanding an answer, not a door marked life and a door marked death positioned theatrically before me. Simply the quiet, weighted, irrevocable knowledge that the life I had been living was still there waiting for me. And so was the man I had been slowly, lovingly, catastrophically failing for 22 years. The rings were still floating before me. I looked at Andres's ring. Still flickering, still holding its flame against whatever draft my certainty had created in the air around it, and I felt something move through me that I can only describe as decision. Not emotion. Deeper than emotion. The place emotion comes from when it is finally honest. I reached toward his ring. Not to take it. Simply to be near it. To let it know, in whatever way a soul in a hallway between worlds can communicate such things, that I understood now what I had been doing to the air around that flame. And that I was sorry. Not the sorry of a woman who has been caught. The sorry of a woman who has finally seen. The hallway began to change. The amber light deepened, shifted, moved from the quality of late afternoon into something closer to dawn. That particular pale gold that arrives before the sun is fully committed to the day, tender and uncertain and full of promise that hasn't yet decided whether to keep itself. The photographs on the walls began to glow softly, all of them simultaneously, as though every moment of our 22 years was being held in equal light rather than the selective illumination I had always applied, brightening the evidence that supported my story, dimming everything that complicated it. And then the pulling began. Not violent. Not the dramatic resurrection of cinema. Something gentler and more absolute than violence, the specific gravity of a life that is not yet finished making its claim on you. I felt it begin at the center of my chest, where my heart had stopped on a Tuesday morning over a cup of coffee I had made for a man who left without saying goodbye. A warmth that was also a pull. A light that was also a direction. And the hallway, the rings, the amber walls, and their honest photographs began to dissolve, not disappearing but receding, the way a shore recedes when a boat moves out to sea. Still real. Still there. Simply no longer where I was. The last thing I saw before the hallway was gone entirely was both rings. Side by side. And, for the first time, both of them burning at equal strength. Then came the pain. It arrived before everything else. Before sound, before sight, before the full terrible re-entry of consciousness into a body that had been without it, the pain arrived like a door being kicked open from the inside. My chest. A burning, percussive, architectural agony that I understood immediately, even through the shock of it, was the sensation of being reclaimed. Of electricity and medicine and human hands refusing to accept the verdict my heart had delivered on that kitchen floor. I gasped. The word is insufficient. I did not simply draw breath, I was reconstituted around breath, rebuilt by it, every cell remembering its function simultaneously in a single violent act of continuation. The sound that came out of me was not recognizable as human. It was something more fundamental than language, more urgent than any word I had ever chosen with such careful, measuring precision. Voices. Multiple. Rapid, professional, overlapping in the specific cadence of people trained to work at the edge of what is survivable. She is back. Sinus rhythm. BP is climbing. I could not open my eyes yet. The light behind my eyelids was enormous, the ordinary fluorescent light of a medical environment arriving against retinas that had just been somewhere luminous beyond description. I lay still inside the noise and let my body remember what it was for. Let my lungs practice the rhythm they had apparently decided to resume. Let my heart beat, that flicker I had seen in amber corridors translated now into physical sensation, each pulse a word. Still here, still here, still here. Andres. His name arrived in my mind before I was fully conscious. Not as a thought exactly, as an orientation. The way a compass needle does not decide to point north but simply does, because that is what it is made for. He was not in the room. I knew this before I opened my eyes, the way you know a room is empty before you see it. He was somewhere in this building, in a corridor or a waiting room, doing what Andres had always done in the spaces my dramas created around him. Waiting. Quietly. Without making his fear anyone else's problem. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was white and entirely ordinary, and the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. A nurse appeared in my field of vision. Young, dark-haired, her expression arranged in the professional warmth of someone who has witnessed revival before, but not so many times that it has stopped meaning something. She said my name. She asked me if I knew where I was. I said yes. My voice was not my voice, it was something scraped and raw and stripped of every performance quality it had accumulated over 44 years, and in its rawness, it was more honest than anything I had said in 2 decades. I said, I need my husband. Not, where am I? Not, what happened? Not, how long was I gone? Those were the questions of a woman who was still at the center of her own story. Something had shifted in that amber hallway that I could already feel would not shift back. I needed Andres. Not to tell him what I had experienced. Not to perform my transformation for an audience of one. I needed him the way you need water when you have been without it long enough to understand what thirst actually is. The nurse said she would get him. The minutes that followed were the longest of my life. I lay in that hospital bed and I breathed and I looked at the white ceiling and I felt, for the first time in 22 years, the full weight of what I had done to our marriage. Not defensively. Not with the instinct to immediately construct the counterargument. Simply felt it. The way you feel weather. The way you feel the reality of a thing when all your strategies for managing it have been temporarily suspended by the shock of nearly dying on your kitchen floor on a Tuesday morning in autumn. The door opened. Andres came through it still wearing his work clothes. Someone had called him mid-morning, mid-meeting, mid-whatever ordinary thing his Tuesday had been before it became the day his wife's heart stopped. His jacket was on. His tie was crooked in a way that told me he had been running his hand through his hair. He always pulled his tie crooked when he did that, a detail I had noted over 22 years without once finding it endearing. I found it endearing now. I found it devastating. I found it the most human thing I had ever seen. He crossed the room in 4 steps and sat in the chair beside my bed and took my hand between both of his. He did not speak immediately. Andres never spoke immediately in moments of high emotion. He arrived in them fully and sat in them quietly, and I had spent 22 years interpreting that silence as absence. I understood now, with my hand between his, that it had never been absence. It had been presence of a kind I was too loud with my own certainty to recognize. He said, finally, quietly, "You scared me." 2 words. The most precise and honest sentence he could have chosen, and he chose it the way he always chose things, without performance, without agenda, without a ledger entry attached. You scared me. Not, do you know what I went through? Not, I have been in that waiting room for 3 hours. Simply, you scared me. The most direct possible expression of love from a man who had been loving me directly and quietly for 22 years while I complained that he was not loud enough about it. I looked at his face. Really looked. The exhaustion in it, yes, but beneath the exhaustion something I recognized now from a transparent wall in an amber hallway. The same quality I had seen in him on that sofa at 10 o'clock at night, in the moment before I asked about the dishwasher. The quality of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has learned not to let it show because showing it had not, historically, been received with care. I turned my hand over inside his and held on. I said, I saw us, Andres. I saw what I have been doing. He went very still. The particular stillness of someone who has heard something they did not know they were waiting to hear, but recognize immediately when it arrives. I said, I am sorry. Not for anything specific. For the whole of it. For every entry I kept. For every sigh. For the plantains. He made a sound. I had not heard Andres make that sound in years, maybe ever. It came from somewhere below language, the place where 22 years of quiet and patience and flickering candle love had been stored without adequate ventilation. His shoulders came forward. His head dropped. And my husband, steady, quiet, endlessly patient Andres, wept. In the plastic chair beside my hospital bed, holding my hand with both of his, he wept the way people weep when a door they had stopped expecting to open finally opens. We stayed there for a long time. Not talking. Not explaining. Not building the framework for the difficult conversations that would come later, and they would come, honest and necessary and sometimes painful, because transformation is not an event but a practice, and we were only at the beginning of ours. But in that room, in that hour, we did the thing I had never in 22 years allowed us to simply do. We were present with each other. Without agenda. Without the ledger. Without performance. Just two people who had been given, by grace they had not earned and could not explain, one more chance to learn each other honestly. We entered counseling 3 weeks after I was discharged. Both individual and together, I needed to understand where the ledger had come from, how far back the accounting went, whose voice had first taught me that love was something you earned through visible sacrifice rather than something you gave freely because the person beside you was worth giving it to. Andres needed space to say the things he had swallowed for 2 decades, and he said them, slowly, carefully, in the way he said everything, and I sat across from him, and I listened without preparing my defense. That was the hardest practice of my life. Harder than any sacrifice I had ever logged. Sitting still inside someone else's truth without immediately reaching for my counterargument. It has been 6 years. I will not tell you we are perfect, because that would be another kind of performance, and I am finished with performance. I will tell you that Andres reaches for my hand now, and I do not analyze the gesture for what it is or is not communicating. I will tell you that I made sancocho last month and cut the plantains wrong on purpose, and he laughed, really laughed, and I understood that what he had been trying to give me 4 years ago on those good plates was not a recipe. It was an act of love in his language. And I had responded in mine, which was criticism wearing the coat of honesty. I understand his language now. I am still learning it. I expect I will be learning it for the rest of whatever life I have been given back. If you are in a marriage tonight where you are certain you are the one who gives more, loves more, suffers more, I am not telling you that you are wrong. I am asking you to consider the possibility that you have been measuring with an instrument calibrated entirely to your own experience. That your spouse may be loving you in a language you have never bothered to learn because you were too committed to teaching them yours. The marriage you want is not on the other side of them changing. It is on the other side of you seeing clearly. And it is not too late. I am proof that it is not too late, but I am also proof of how much time you can lose while you are waiting for the proof. Do not wait. If this story reached something in you tonight, something you have been carrying quietly in the way that Andres carried things quietly, leave it in the comments. You do not have to explain it. You do not have to have the words yet. Just let me know you are here. I am praying for every marriage represented in this space tonight. Father, open our eyes. Help us see each other the way you see us. Heal what our pride has damaged. Restore what our blindness has cost. And if you are not yet subscribed, please do. There are more stories coming. Stories of people who went somewhere beyond this life and came back changed in ways that matter. We are building something here that I believe you need. And I believe you know it too, or you would not have stayed until the end.